As she opened the carton, a strange smell filled the kitchen. She began washing the meat. Suddenly, her fingers brushed against something hard. A human finger. In the outskirts of a big city stood a ground house. The house belonged to the wealthy Adewale family. They were known for keeping to themselves and they were a very successful couple. Ifeoma, a young girl from a small village, started working for the Adewale's family 4 months ago. At first, it seemed like a good job. They paid her well, and she had enough to eat, but she was never allowed to leave the house. The workload was heavy, and she often found herself cleaning, cooking, and running errands for long hours without much rest. Despite the workload, Ifeoma wasn't unhappy, but something always felt off. Mr. Adewale and his wife, Madam Bimpe, had peculiar habits. They never ate beef, goat meat, chicken, or fish. Instead, they always requested for one specific type of meat that Ifeoma couldn't quite identify. It looks like pork, but the texture and color were slightly different. Whenever Ifeoma asked about it, Madam Bimpe would just brush her off, saying it was a special delicacy from her hometown. Ifeoma tried to ignore her growing unease, convincing herself that it was none of her business. Maybe the couple had strange tastes, or maybe it was for health reasons. However, her suspicions were aroused further when she noticed that no one else in the household ate the strange meats. Jude, the driver, and Marcus, the gateman, would always make excuses when offered a plate, saying they had already eaten or weren't hungry. When Ifeoma tried to ask them why, they would look at her with fear in their eyes and tell her to mind her own business. One day, Madam Bimpe came home with a large carton of the mysterious meat, and Ifeoma was instructed to prepare it immediately. As she opened the carton, a strange smell filled the kitchen, different from anything she had encountered before. She began washing the meat, her hands working mechanically as her mind drifted towards her family back home. Suddenly, her fingers brushed against something hard, and out of place, puzzled, Ifeoma pulled the piece out of the water. It was a long, thin bone, unlike anything she had ever seen in meat before. She continued to inspect it, her heart pounding, and then her eyes fell on something that made her gasp and dropped the meat on the floor. A human finger. Ifeoma's world tilted, and she staggered back, clutching the sink for support. Her stomach churned, and she barely made it to the trash bin before vomiting. She looked back at the meat, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. It can't be true, she thought to herself. Her mind raced. How many times have she cooked this meat? How many times had Mr. and Mrs. Adewale sat on their table, eating with pleasure while she unknowingly served them human flesh? She felt sickened, guilty and terrified all at once. What kind of people were there? And more importantly, what happens if they find out she knew? Ifeoma knew she had to get out of that house, but escaping was easier said than done. The gates were always locked, and Marcus, the gateman, never allowed anyone to leave the house without Mr. or Mrs. Adewale's permission. Jude, the driver, was equally unfriendly and would not help her no matter how much she pleaded. Ifeoma felt trapped like a prisoner in a house filled with dark secrets. For the next few days, Ifeoma tried to act normal, pretending she hadn't seen anything. She did chores quietly, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with anyone. But inside, she was plotting her escape. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she would tiptoe to the kitchen, trying to find a way out. She thought about climbing over the fence, but it was too high and covered in sharp broken glasses. She considered sneaking out when the gates were briefly opened, but Marcus was always watching. The days dragged on, each one filled with fear and anxiety. Ifeoma couldn't sleep, she couldn't eat. She was haunted by nightmares of bones and blood, of Mr. and Mrs. Adewale finding out she knew their secrets. She knew she had to get out before it was too late. One morning, as Ifeoma was cleaning the living room, she overheard Madam Bimpe on a phone call. She was talking in a hushed tone, her voice calm but menacing. "Make sure the delivery is on time," Madam Bimpe said. "We have guests this weekend, and they are expecting something special." Ifeoma's blood ran cold. Who were these guests, and what did Madam Bimpe mean by something special? The thought that the Adewales were not just eating human being, but possibly serving it to others made Ifeoma's skin crawl. She knew she had to leave that day, no matter the costs. That evening, Ifeoma made her first attempt to escape. She packed a small bag with her most important belongings and waited until the house was quiet. She sneaked down to the back door, hoping to slip past Marcus while he was on his usual night rounds. But as soon as she stepped outside, Marcus appeared from the shadows. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked. Ifeoma tried to come up with an excuse, but the fear in her voice gave her away. I just wanted some fresh air," she stammered. Marcus grabbed her arm roughly. "Get back inside. You know the rules. No one leaves this house." Defeated Ifeoma returned to her room, tears streaming down her face. She was scared, but she refused to give up. She had to be smart, to think of another way. Days went by, and Ifeoma tried to gain Marcus' trust, bringing him extra food and helping him with his chores. But Marcus remained cold and distant, unwilling to be swayed by her kindness. Then, one fateful afternoon, Ifeoma noticed something that gave her a glimmer of hope. Jude, the driver, was always careful about locking the car doors when he parked. But on this particular day, he was distracted, talking loudly on his phone. As he stepped away, Ifeoma saw that he had left the back door of the car slightly open. A plan formed in her mind. She would hide in the car and wait for Jude to leave the compound. It was risky, but it was her only chance. She quickly packed her bags again, making sure the bag was small and light. When the time was right, she slipped into the back seat, crouching down and pulling a blanket over herself to stay hidden. Her heart pounded as she lay still, praying that no one would find her. Minutes felt like hours, and just when she thought she couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Jude returned. He started engine and drove towards the gates. Ifeoma held her breath as Marcus opened the gate, letting the car out. For the first time in months, Ifeoma felt a surge of hope. She was finally outside those walls, but her relief was short-lived. Jude stopped at a nearby market, where he usually ran errands for the Adewales. Ifeoma knew she had to get out before Jude noticed her, so she quietly slipped out of the car and blended into the crowd. She didn't stop running until she was far away from the market. Her legs were aching and her lungs were burning. Ifeoma found her way to the nearest police station, shaking as she told the officers everything she had seen. At first, they were skeptical, finding it hard to believe that such a respected couple could involve themselves in something as horrific as that. But Ifeoma's fear and sincerity were impossible to ignore. They launched an investigation, and what they discovered shocked the entire city. Madam Bimpe had been part of a black market ring that trafficked human organs and meats. The strange meat she brought home was sourced from illegal slaughterhouses run by a network of criminals. The police raided the Adewale's home, uncovering evidence that linked them to the gruesome trade. Mr. and Mrs. Adewale were arrested, and their dark secrets were exposed. Ifoma's bravery in coming forward helped save countless lives and brought justice to those who has been exploited by the sinister ring. She found a safe place to stay and started a new job, far away from the horrors she had escaped. Though the memories would always haunt her, she knew she had done something great. Mr. and Mrs. Adewale spent the rest of their life in jail. And that was how the story of Ifoma the brave girl ended. The moral of this story is this: never ignore your instincts when something feels wrong, even if it's hidden behind a facade of wealth and respectability. The truth may be hard to face, but it's always better to confront it than to live in fear and ignorance. Your courage to speak out can make a difference, not just for yourself, but for others who are trapped in dangerous situations. Trust your guts and don't be afraid to seek help when you need it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you were entertained. And please, if you haven't subscribed, kindly click on the subscribe button. Turn on the notifications so when I post more interesting stories, you'll be the first to get them. I do not take your support for granted. Thank you so much. See you in my next video. Bye.